2OCT25 coffee sermon, light topic, the rapture. Barrett, what do you believe? Pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib? None of that. I believe none of that. But why? Well, if you've been here for any length of time, you may or may not be aware that I've read every word of the New Testament on camera, including the entire book of Revelation, the last book in the Bible. And see, that's called eschatology. What do you believe happens in end times? What's your eschatology, Barrett? Bro, what's your soteriology? How do you believe? What is faith and justification? Shut up with all of that bullshit. Read the book. Do what it says to do. Period. The end. Are you a dispensationalist? But stop. What does the book say? Okay, do not add to or take away from this book. You find that in Deuteronomy 4, I believe that it is. And then you also find that in Revelation chapter 22 from the mouth of Messiah. He who adds to this book shall have the plagues of this book added unto him, and he who takes away from this book shall have his name taken out of the book of life. Okay, so just what does the book say? Well, the book doesn't say anything about a rapture. John Darby did in the 1860s. Yeah. Look into that. John Darby. It's common spelling. John. Darby. Darby. See, the United States had just gone through a brutal civil war, and the idea that God would remove us from suffering became wildly popular, of course reinforced by the Schofield Bible. Whole nother rabbit hole. Which is why I have 16 translations of the Bible. See, stone soup, right? A translation of a translation of a translation is a bad reference, right? We're playing telephone at this point. Like, the Message Bible, terrible, just terrible. King Jimmy, serviceable asterisk. A lot of additions and retractions from the King Jimmy. My EDC Bible, I know, looking is hard when you attempt to back out of a driveway on a county road. There we go. Good job. Way to not have a motor vehicle accident. My EDC Bible is the Scriptures, ISR 2009 version. The Scriptures. You can actually find it at grindstoneministries.com. At our cost. We don't make $1 on the Father's Word. Because the Scriptures, the translators of the Scriptures went back to the Septuagint and the Masoretic texts, the original documents, and spent 20 plus years doing a fresh translation from the original documents. Okay, so when we look at the original documents and the earliest of church beliefs, there's no rapture. We don't get the idea of rapture until 160-ish years ago. In fact, there's certain believers on planet Earth that are part of the ecclesia, the body of Christ, today. You go and talk to them about a rapture, they're like, what are you, high? That's not in here. What are you talking about? Now, hopefully you do the proverb of the day. What does that mean? Well, today's October the 2nd, Proverbs 2. If you look at the last verses in today's proverb, the wicked are plucked out of the earth. So yeah, there's a rapture, but not the way that it's taught. The wicked are plucked out of the earth. Separating the wheat from the chaff. Have Have you heard of that one before? What happens, or the parable of the wheat and the tares? What is tares? Tares is it's a weed, an invasive species that looks like wheat, but it does not bear good fruit. And it's sowed in by the enemy amongst the field of the master. And then the servants of the master say, hey, an enemy has come and sowed your field with tares. What shall we do? And the master says, just wait, we'll get it at harvest time. And then what happens? See, the wheat bows down, folds over under the weight of the fruit that it bears, the wheat berries, the grain. The tares does not. It stands stiff-necked and proud, and that's how they can tell the difference between the wheat and the tares. And then the tares are plucked out and burnt up, consumed, and the wheat is harvested. Okay, let's go back to wheat and chaff. It goes all the way back to Obed-Edom and the threshing floor at Hebron, and the Ark of the Covenant being brought back into Jerusalem during the reign of David. And then David has a little conversation with the prophet Nathan and the Most High, and says, hey, David speaking, I've got a house, but God doesn't have a house. I should build God a house. I should build him a temple. That's what we call conviction. So David begins the work of that, later referred to as Solomon's temple. Solomon is the son of David. We don't have to jump in that rabbit hole, but in any event, that was a threshing floor where wheat was threshed. Well, how do we thresh wheat? When the wheat is ripe, it dies, okay? The plant dies, and we harvest it, we cut it, we let it dry. You ever cut hay before? So you cut, it's a grass, you cut it, you let it dry out, and then you have this whole stalk of wheat. And this whole stalk of wheat, the head of which is laden with grain. And so you lay out the stalks of grain on the threshing floor, which is, think of like a porch, okay? It's a wooden structure with boards, slats on the bottom. And you take your pitchfork and you throw the wheat up into the air. You throw the wheat up into the air, okay? And the wheat berries fall off of the stalk and fall back to the threshing floor. The wheat stalk is blown away by the wind. So the chaff is blown away. The berries, the fruit, falls back to the ground. This guy got a stop sign out. I don't understand. Same guy with the stop sign paddle. I don't get it. I don't get it. He wants that side of the road stopped, but not this side. Waves me on every morning. Way to school zone, homie. Okay, so the berries fall back. They fall to the slats on the ground. You put a sheet of cloth underneath the slats, and the berries fall through the slats. They're collected on the cloth. But the chaff is blown away. Okay, so the fruit stays. We retain the good fruit, the wheat berries. The junk, the chaff, is thrown into the sky and gone, which goes back to Proverbs chapter 2. The wicked are plucked out of the earth, the wheat and the tares. Okay? But wait a minute. Paul said, we'll be gathered to him in the twinkling of an eye. Yes. Yep. And we're going to be up into the sky, right? We're going up into the sky to meet him. And that same phraseology that Paul is using is the same phraseology that is used that when a king would go to visit a city, that a delegation would leave the city and meet the king that is en route to the city, and then bring them back into the city with this delegation, pomp and circumstance, and all of the regalia, and all the gravitas that this situation requires, because the king is coming. So this is what people need to understand. Messiah is coming in the clouds. Okay, so he's going to be up there on his way down. And yes, we will go meet him in the sky. On his way down. How does that work? I don't know. How long is that going to last? I don't know. But see, the earth does not fade away. We're not being raptured up to heaven where we're going to stay in heaven. The earth is made new. Heaven is here on earth after the end of an age. And so the idea of a biblical rapture, if that's what we're going to talk about, is not that good Christ-fearing Christians are going to be plucked out of the earth to avoid hardship. That concept does not exist in the Bible. It's a welcoming thought. It's a welcoming concept, but it's not biblical. Nowhere else in the Bible does the Father remove his people from struggle. And if you read the Bible, see, this is part of the danger of dispensationalism. It's what allows people to teach rapture theology, which is wrong, which is false, without any backlash, because none of their constituents, none of their congregants understand the remainder of the Bible. They don't read it. They have it read to them. And so they didn't start in Genesis chapter 1 and read all the way to Revelation 22 and then do it over and over again. So you can see the 65,000 plus biblical cross references from Old Testament to New. 65,000 written by somewhere between 38 and 40 men, somewhere around a time span of about 2,500 years, which goes back to a single source, the one, Elohim, God. Okay, so there's congruency throughout the word, which is why the doctrine of inerrancy works. We let the Bible interpret the Bible because it was it written by hand by men? Yeah, 100%. But it was divinely inspired by the Most High. Now people will get into, yeah, well, the Bible used to have 88 books, now it only has 66. What happened to the other 22 non-canonical texts? My best reference for this is called The Lost Books of the Bible, Great Rejected Texts by Joseph B. Lumpkin, 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 who is a believer and a biblical scholar. And that's really important to understand because more than 50% of biblical scholars are not believers. Okay? So, beware the leaven of the Pharisees. I mean, even the demons know the name and tremble. Even demons tremble. And these air quote biblical scholars, it's like Wikipedia articles. Like, we know a full third of Wikipedia is like 10 nerds that have an axe to grind, that are like super liberal, you know, pushing this woke agenda, ideological bullcrap. Okay? And so we know that Wikipedia is unreliable, but yet when we investigate biblical historicity, we don't look at sources. All right? So more than half of biblical scholars are unbelievers. So beware of that. So Joseph B. Lumpkin, The Lost Books of the Bible, the Great Rejected Texts. Many of those books were removed in large part for good reason. Without getting too far into the weeds, we look at things like the Gnostic Gospels. Well, yeah, you know, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas. But what is Gnosis? What are the Gnostics? Well, they were strongly influenced by Plato, Aristotle, Stoicism. They believed that you could think your way into the presence of the Most High. But that's counter to what Messiah says, no man comes to the Father but through me. They also believe, you know, the demiurge, maybe you've heard that term before, that it's blasphemy. They believe that Yahweh, Jehovah, Yahweh, that the Creator God was a copy of the original infinite one. because of Sophia, which is the Greek word for wisdom, who was an emanation that represents the Holy Spirit. And then Sophia tried to create in the model of the Most High, and she created the demiurge. Real name is Yalbastaroth or something, some crap like that. And that because the demiurge is the one that made the earth is therefore bad. And that everything that God says to do in the Bible, that God is actually the demiurge, which is a false God, and therefore we should do the opposite of everything that the Bible says to do, which is why the snake in the garden is actually a good guy, not a bad guy, because he was trying to restore humanity back to their original status of made in the image of the Most High, not made in the image of the demiurge. Yeah, that's Gnosticism in a nutshell. So they shouldn't be in the Bible, if you ask me. Are they interesting? Oh, hell yeah, they're interesting. But it goes back to consider the source, which brings us back to John Darby. Consider the source. Darby and his rapture doctrine, see, what most people don't realize is Darby sold a hymnal. It was a partner to the popular Bible of the day. And that hymnal, right? See, so Darby had a vested interest in people buying into this doctrine, and that hymnal had little anecdotal notes in there about Darby's theology. And so Darby was making money on this. Now, recently, I don't know, what was it, a week, 10 days ago, there was supposed to be another rapture that was going to happen, and it didn't happen, and it's not gonna. Now, I would love to be wrong about this. Don't get me wrong. I would love to be wrong about this. The idea, when I read the book of Revelation, and I see the lesser and the greater tribulations that are in there, 7 years of woe. I have a wife, I have children, I have people that I love, I have a congregation that I'm responsible for. But, I don't want them to go through suffering. But that's just not what I get from the texts. And so we have to consider the source. Darby had a vested interest in peddling this bullshit. And today, there are preachers, pastors, bad leaders, shepherds. Jeremiah 3:15, Ra'ah, I shall raise up shepherds, pastors over you after my own heart, says Yahuwah, that will feed you with knowledge and understanding. There's no knowledge and understanding in the broad view of Christian end times eschatology. In fact, I don't believe, because most Christian eschatology requires you to believe that there are multiple timelines taking place at the same time in multiple places in the book of Revelation. And that's required in order to justify their false teachings and false doctrines. That's unbiblical. It would be the only book in the Bible that's out of order. My God is a God of order, not a God of chaos. I don't have to jump through hoops to make sense of what it is that he says. We've discussed the parashat, the remez, the drash, and the sod. The parashat meaning the literal, what does it say? We can never negate the parashat with interpretations of the remez, the drash, and the sod. That's also unbiblical. That began to be codified with the apostolic fathers and the early church fathers. Which is why, again, we go to 1860. We know we have a problem here. If a teaching from 1860 violates the parashat, the literal of what the word says, and the earliest apostolic traditions and the early church fathers, Martin Luther, Calvin had no understanding of rapture. Okay? Jerome had no understanding of rapture. Jerome translated the entire New Testament. No understanding of rapture. No teachings on rapture. None of that. So we have to consider the source. Darby had a financial interest in peddling this bullshit, as pastors do today. And in order to teach this bullshit, they have to get you to believe that Revelation is this giant puzzle that cannot be cracked. And what it is, Revelation is at least 80% rehash of the 3 major and the 12 minor prophets put into a chronological timeline, because John is told, do not seal this book up. Give it to my people so they know what's coming, which dovetails perfectly into the prophecy of Messiah, Matthew 24, Mark 15. Why give us a confusing jumble of mess that doesn't make any sense at all? See, and it's only the teachings of the rapture and bad pastors, bad leadership, that require Revelation to be a jumbled mess that doesn't make any sense at all in order to support their bullshit doctrines. But parashat, literal, what does it say? I'm the Lord Yahweh Sabaoth, I change not. Malachi 3:6, do not add to or take away from the word of this book. Messiah, Revelation 22, verse 12. 14 through 17. Okay? We're not allowed to add to what it says. We're not allowed to take away from what it says. And you don't get to rapture without adding and taking away. In a nutshell. Now, if you disagree with any of that, that's cool. That's your right to disagree with that. I'm good with conversation in the comments. I'm not good with personal attacks or biblical attacks in the comments. That's a really good way to get cut off real quick. And I would encourage you, before you make any arguments against what I've just said, number one, check my references. Number two, reminder, I've read all of Revelation, every single word of it on camera. YouTube channel, Bear Independent. Go check it out. I'll see y'all when I see you. I got to go in here and get busy at work.